It started with a $4,900 check folded into my coat pocket and a locked drawer in my daughter-in-law's home office that she told me was just old tax files. By the time I finished, I had traced a forged digital signature through an IP address and document metadata, voided an $860,000 sale of my patient accounts, and watched her shred denials in a lab coat that said coded me out, while every claim form printed the fraud docket. I am the paramedic who built a billing company with her, and this is how I took it back. My name is Ellen. I spent 33 years in the back of an ambulance, and I cashed out $142,000 from my retirement to start Cascade medical billing and coding with my daughter-in-law, Renee. I can read a remittance advice faster than most people read a diner menu, and I can find a faint pulse through 2 pairs of jeans. My father was a locksmith before he died when I was 19, and he taught me how to feel a binding pin in a lock before I was old enough to hold a driver's license. That skill saved my life later, but not in the way I expected. My husband, the quiet architect of our family, died 8 years before I retired. After that, the only family I had left was my son David, my pension, and a very specific set of hands that had gripped gurney rails on the worst nights of my life. Renee came to me 6 months after I retired with a business plan printed on slick paper and a notary stamp in her purse. She had been a notary for 5 years, she said, and she could handle the back end while I handled the clients. She notarized our partnership agreement right there at my kitchen table, 50-50, and she promised free claim audits for my old ambulance crew, the men and women I had worked beside in the mud and the rain and the back of a rig at 3 a.m. I believed her because she was David's wife, and because grief makes you look for a load-bearing wall where there is only a painted door. David died on a wet stretch of Interstate 7 months after we opened the company. Within a day of his death, Renee and her new boyfriend Marcus showed up at my house with a casserole and a folder of legal documents they called a formality. The funeral was 2 days later. Renee wore a black wrap dress and kept touching my elbow like I was a fragile old woman who might shatter. Marcus, her new boyfriend, spent the whole time on his phone near the back of the chapel. He had the kind of slick, image-obsessed face that looks good in a real estate billboard, and he kept checking his watch as if grief had a time limit. At the repast, Renee introduced me to a notary she had brought along, a woman with a faded stamp and a nervous smile. She said we could settle the estate paperwork right there between the potato salad and the lemon bars. I told her I was not signing anything until I had read it, and she laughed like I had made a joke. That night she pushed a stack of papers toward me and said, "Ellen, you should not be alone in that big house. Let me take care of everything." She used the word everything the way a vulture uses the word dinner. I said I needed to sleep, and I went to my bedroom and locked the door. The next morning, Renee was cleaning out David's office. She had already filled 3 garbage bags with his old files, his notebooks, his maps, his little collection of paramedic challenge coins. I stood in the doorway and watched her toss a small cedar box into the trash bag. It hit the bottom with a dry, hollow sound. "That's just junk," she said without looking up. "Old receipts, old pens, nothing worth keeping." I waited until she left to take a shower, and then I pulled the box out of the bag. It was the size of a Bible, with a tarnished brass latch and a faint scorch mark on one corner from a candle I had lit during a blackout 10 years earlier. Inside was a small blue ledger, the kind David used to carry in his back pocket when he was a teenager. The pages were soft and yellow at the edges. The ledger was not empty. On the inside front cover, David had written a list of passwords and account numbers, but the last page held the warning. Tucked between 2 blank pages was a small photograph of the 2 of us at my paramedic graduation, and on the back he had written, "Mom, you are the strongest person I know." I tucked that photo into my bra strap and carried it against my ribs. I opened the ledger to the last page, and there in David's careful slanted handwriting was a single line. "Do not trust Renee. Save yourself." I sat on the edge of the bathtub with that ledger in my hands, and I could hear Renee downstairs humming while she made coffee. The warning was not an accident. David had written it in pencil, and he had pressed hard enough to leave grooves in the paper. He had underlined the word Renee 3 times, and the last underline was so deep it had torn through the page. I did not cry. I did not call out. I closed the box, hid it under my mattress, and went downstairs to play the part of a grieving, confused mother-in-law. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe family should not be allowed to sign away your life with a forged name. Renee and Marcus started the pressure the very next day. Renee told me I was in no condition to manage the business, the house, or even my own checking account. She placed a power of attorney form in front of me and said, "This will let me pay your bills while you heal." Marcus stood behind her with his arms crossed, and he added, "It's standard, Ellen, you sign it and we handle everything." The form was 10 pages long, and it gave her the right to sell my house, access my retirement accounts, and sign on behalf of the company. I did not sign it. I did not refuse either. I looked at the paper, let my hands shake just enough, and said, "I need a few days to think, sweetie. My head is still foggy from the funeral." Renee smiled and patted my hand. "Of course, take your time." But I saw her glance at Marcus, and I saw the corner of his mouth tighten. That evening she cornered me at the kitchen table with a smaller form. She called it a medical release, but it was another signature line, attached to a document that authorized her to talk to my bank. I asked her to read it out loud, and she stumbled over the phrase "durable power of attorney for property and financial affairs." I let my hand tremble as I reached for my coffee mug, then I knocked it over and watched the dark liquid spread across the papers. "Oh no, I am so sorry, sweetie, my hands just do that now," I said. Renee smiled with her teeth, but her eyes went flat. She mopped it up with a paper towel and said, "We will try again tomorrow, Ellen. It's important not to leave these things hanging." Marcus stood in the doorway with his arms crossed and said, "The bank does not like delays." I smiled vaguely and shuffled back to my room. They moved me into their house 2 weeks later. Renee said it was temporary, just until I felt stronger, but she had already listed my place for rent. She hired a moving crew while I was at a doctor's appointment, and when I came back, my whole life was in boxes in their spare room. The room had a single window, a lock on the outside of the door, and a Wi-Fi password they refused to share. I noticed my mother's silver locket was missing from my jewelry box, but I did not ask. Renee began opening my mail at the kitchen table, holding each envelope up to the light before sliding a fingernail under the flap. She told me it was to protect me from overdue bills, but I noticed she stacked anything from the bank in a separate pile and took it to her office before I could read the return address. Once she handed me a birthday card from my sister and said, "See, I open the good ones too." I did not fight. I played weak. I shuffled around in an old robe, asked the same question twice, and let them think I was too broken to notice what they were doing. I kept the cedar box buried in my suitcase under a layer of thermal socks, right next to a pair of lockpicks my father had given me before he died. I had kept those picks in the lining of my suitcase for 30 years, because you never know when you will need to open a door that someone else locked. The red flags started almost immediately. Renee spent hours on the phone in her home office, and I could hear her through the heating vent in the spare room. She said things like, "The national group will not close until the dissolution is signed, and I told you the digital signature will hold." Another time she screamed into the phone, "I don't care if the compliance officer called, just tell them the owner is resting." Marcus would pace the hallway at 2 in the morning, muttering about a wire transfer and a closing date. They bought a new Tesla, a 75-inch television, and a pair of leather recliners that still had the tags on them. Renee left a credit card statement on the kitchen counter one morning, and I saw a charge for $14,000 at a Las Vegas casino. We were supposed to be drowning in grief, and they were planning a vacation. I started keeping a running mental log, the way I used to track vital signs on a mass casualty board. March 2nd, Renee bought a $900 purse. March 5th, Marcus leased a fishing boat with no trailer hitch on his car. March 8th, they both got matching gold watches that looked like they had been financed at 30% interest. That same week, a process server knocked on the front door and asked for Renee Campo. She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed and said, "Wrong house." Later, I found a crumpled subpoena in the recycling bin. It was from a medical office in town, and it demanded payment for a botched buttocks treatment. Renee was being sued for $12,000 while she was spending $14,000 in Las Vegas. Meanwhile, the bank statements for Cascade stopped arriving at the house, and when I asked, Renee said she had switched us to paperless billing to save trees. The household accident happened about a month after I moved in. The garbage disposal under their kitchen sink jammed, and Marcus stood over it with a butter knife, whining that the water would not drain. Renee was on the phone with a cosmetic dentist, discussing veneers. I walked into the kitchen in my slippers and said, "Let me look at it." Marcus laughed. "What are you going to do, Ellen? Give it CPR?" I did not answer. I climbed under the sink with a flashlight, reached into the disposer drawers with a wooden spoon first to make sure the power was off, then I found the hex-shaped rotor hole at the center bottom. I worked the wrench back and forth until the blades broke free of a hard chunk of chicken bone and a shred of a dish towel. When I hit the reset button, the motor spun clean. The disposal rumbled back to life, and I slid out from under the sink without a single drop of soap on my robe. Renee and Marcus stared at me like I had just performed surgery on a whale. I used to fix the ambulance gurneys when the engine crew couldn't figure them out, I said. Then I went back to my room and wrote down the time, the date, and the exact words they had said, on a piece of paper I hid inside the cedar box. That little moment changed the air in the house. Renee stopped leaving me alone with Marcus, and Marcus stopped mocking me. They did not understand that my hands had spent 30 years gripping gurney rails and turning oxygen valves, and that weakness in old age is not the same as ignorance. That night, while they were at a dinner with the National Billing Group, I went into Renee's home office. The door was locked, but my father had been a locksmith before he died in his shop when I was 19, and he taught me how to rake a 4-pin Schlage lock with a tension wrench and a half-diamond pick. I kept those 2 small tools in the lining of my suitcase, right next to David's cedar box. I used the tension wrench to apply a light rotational force to the plug, then dragged the half-diamond pick across the pins until I felt the first binding pin click. The second pin was shallow, the third was set, and the fourth resisted until I eased off the tension just enough to let it catch. The lock turned in 11 seconds, and the sound it made was quieter than a breath. Inside, the office smelled like paper and cheap perfume. The trash can by the desk was full of shredded documents. Renee used a strip-cut shredder, not a cross-cut, so the pieces were long ribbons that fell back together easily if you had patience. I knelt on the carpet and started rebuilding. I laid the ribbons out on the floor like a paper puzzle, matching the torn edges under the light from my phone. It took 40 minutes to reassemble the first document, because the shredder had cut through the notary stamp and the signature block. I used a roll of matte tape I found in the desk drawer to hold the strips together on the back side, careful not to cover the ink. The result was a readable false certificate of dissolution. I found a draft of a certificate of dissolution with my name typed in the signature block. The signature was not mine, but it looked close enough to fool an overworked county clerk. The document said I had agreed to dissolve Cascade Medical Billing and Coding, our company, and transfer all assets to Renee. Stapled to it was a personal guarantee for a $200,000 merchant cash advance from a high-interest lender. My name was on that too, same forged signature, same date. The address for the loan proceeds was Renee's personal checking account. I photographed everything with my phone, then I opened her filing cabinet with the same pick. The second drawer held a manila folder labeled Cascade Sale. Inside was the original partnership agreement, the one she had notarized as a 50-50 split, with my real signature in blue ink and her notary stamp in the corner. Behind it was a signed asset purchase agreement selling our patient accounts to a company called Meridian National Billing Group for $860,000. The payout schedule listed Renee Campo as the sole recipient. I also found a printed email from a DocuSign account. It showed a completed document called Cascade Dissolution Final, DocX. The email listed the signer as Ellen Reese, but the IP address was 73, 19, 44, 201. I knew that IP address. It was the same one Renee used when she streamed yoga classes 3 times a week. The document metadata said the PDF was created with Adobe Acrobat Pro DC 2023-006, and the author field was Renee Campo. The timestamp on the digital signature was 11:42 p.m. on a Sunday night, a time when any normal person would be asleep. The IP geolocation traced to a residential block in their own town, not the coffee shop where she told me I had signed it. I pulled out my phone and took a photo of the email header. Then I opened the PDF on Renee's own computer using a guest account that had no password. The document properties window listed the original author, the creation date, and the application version. I wrote all of it down on a paper towel with a golf pencil I kept in my robe pocket because paper towels can be flushed and golf pencils do not bleed. I could picture her sitting in that office with a glass of Chardonnay, clicking through the DocuSign envelope with my name and her own mouse. She had not even bothered to clear the metadata. I sat in her office chair and read the whole file twice. Then I checked the recycle bin on the computer desktop, and I found a deleted folder called Ellen. Inside it was a scanned copy of my driver's license, my social security card, and my Medicare card, all saved as PDFs with Renee's author stamp on each file. That was when I understood the scope of the fraud. She was not just stealing the company. She was building a financial identity out of my name. I put everything back exactly where I found it, relocked the door, and went to my room. The next morning, I dug through my own records and found the $4,900 check Renee had sent me 2 weeks earlier. In the memo line, she had written EOB final distribution. It was her idea of a joke. an explanation of benefits, as if $4,900 was a fair payment for my half of a company she had just sold for $860,000. I did not deposit it. I folded it into my coat pocket, the same pocket where I once kept nitroglycerin tablets for patients who were about to die. I needed an ally, and I found one through an old friend at the ambulance company. His wife worked at the regional bank where Cascade kept its operating account, and she put me in touch with a woman named Marta, a fraud compliance officer. I parked my old Buick at a truck stop off the interstate and fed quarters into a payphone like a woman from another century. The phone smelled like diesel smoke and spilled soda, and I had to press the handset hard against my ear to hear over the rumbling of 18-wheelers. Marta answered on the third ring, and I gave her my name and the company name, not knowing if she would hang up or call security. Instead, she said, "Give me your son's date of birth and the last 4 digits of the operating account." I gave them to her, and then I heard her typing. A moment later she said, "We have a freeze on a wire transfer tied to this account, and I need to know if you are calling from a safe line." I told her I was, and then she went quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Mrs. Reese, I was hoping you would call. We placed a freeze on an $860,000 wire transfer last week because it did not match the account's dual approval settings." She told me that my son David had come into the branch 1 month before he died and added a security feature to the business account. Any outgoing wire over $10,000 had to be verbally confirmed by me in person, with a branch manager and a fingerprint scan. It was a dead man's switch, tied to my presence and my identity. Renee could forge a digital signature on a fake dissolution, but she could not forge my fingerprint in front of a bank officer. The sale was frozen, and Meridian was getting nervous. Marta spoke in the calm, clipped tone of a woman who had seen 400 cases of elder fraud and knew exactly which ones would stick. She said the bank's own security had flagged the transaction because Renee had tried to bypass the dual approval rule by submitting a forged, notarized letter. The branch manager had looked at the letter and then at the account holder's original signature card and called fraud. David had also left a handwritten note in the bank's safe deposit log, a note the branch manager had scanned into the fraud file. It read, "If my mother ever comes in alone and looks scared, do not tell her she has to sign anything. Call fraud compliance and lock the account until she says the word sycamore." I cried in that phone booth, one hard sob, and then I swallowed it and told Marta I could get her the original forged guarantee within a week. Marta asked me if I could gather one more piece of proof. She wanted the original of that forged personal guarantee, or a screenshot of the DocuSign metadata showing Renee's IP address. I told her I could get it. She said she would bring in the FBI's white-collar unit if I could prove the loan was taken out in my name. I said, "Give me 1 week. She thinks I am too weak to open a jar." Marta paused and said, "I like you, Mrs. Reese. Meet me at the branch next Tuesday at 10. There will be 2 agents, but they will look like bankers until the right moment." Then she hung up, and I stood in the phone booth with the handset still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone like it was a heartbeat. I staged the medical scare that Friday. I had already told Renee I was feeling dizzy from a new blood pressure medication, and I made sure she saw me stumble once in the hallway. At around 6 in the evening, when I knew she was in the living room sorting through papers, I stood in the doorway and let my face go slack. I clutched my chest, made a soft gasping sound, and collapsed to the floor just inside the room. I fell on my side with my eyes half open, the way I had seen 1,000 real emergencies fall. My left hand was curled against my sternum. My breathing went shallow and irregular. I had practiced the collapse in the bathroom mirror 3 times, until the fall looked natural and the slight gurgle in my throat sounded like pulmonary edema. I had also placed a small folded note inside my bra with Marta's number in case they did call an ambulance and a real paramedic showed up. But they did not call. Renee looked up from the file in her lap. She looked at me on the floor. Her face did not change. No panic, no phone call, no frantic movement. She closed the folder, stood up and stepped over my body. Her heel came down 6 inches from my face. She walked to the coffee table, picked up the forged power of attorney and said, "Where is the signed transfer, Ellen? You were supposed to sign it yesterday." I did not answer. I lay still, my breath rattling in my throat. Marcus came in from the garage and said, "Is she okay?" Renee said she will be fine. "She just needs to sign this." She stepped over me again on her way back to the couch. That was the moment any residual family loyalty I had left died on the floor of that living room. I had delivered a baby in a gas station parking lot and held a young man's hand as he told me his mother's phone number with his last breath, and I had never felt the cold absence of mercy until I watched my daughter-in-law step over my still body to get to a stack of forged documents. I did not move. I did not even let my eyelids flutter. I counted her footsteps, 1, 2, 3, and I knew she paused for exactly 1 second to look at the coffee table before she picked up the paper. I waited until they went to the kitchen, then I got up, walked to my room and locked the door. I sat on the bed and listened to them clinking dishes and laughing about something on the television. I did not cry. My body was too full of a cold, clear resolve. I opened the cedar box, looked at David's warning and whispered to the photograph, "I'm going to make you proud, baby." The confrontation came 4 days later. Renee and Marcus told me we were going to the bank to sign a final partnership tax form. They dressed me in a clean blouse and helped me into the car like I was a hospice patient. Renee carried a leather portfolio and Marcus drove with one hand on the wheel and the other on his phone. When we pulled into the bank parking lot, I saw Marta standing at the front door with a branch manager and 2 men in dark suits. Renee did not recognize her. She thought it was just bank security. We went into a private office on the 2nd floor. A notary was already there, along with a representative from Meridian National Billing Group. Renee opened her portfolio and slid a stack of papers across the table. The first page said consent to sale and distribution of assets. The signature line was blank. She clicked a pen and held it out to me. "Just sign, Ellen. This releases your share to me so we can pay your medical bills." I looked at the pen, then at her face, then at the notary. The branch manager stood by the wall with his arms crossed. Marta sat in the corner, tapping a folder against her knee. I did not take the pen. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the $4,900 check. I placed it on the table in front of Renee. "This is my share," I said. $4,900. You wrote EOB in the memo line. I spent 33 years bringing people back from the dead, and you thought I would not recognize a forgery when it was stamped across my own life. Renee's face went white, but she recovered fast. "Ellen, you are confused. You signed this dissolution yourself. We have the digital certificate." The notary, a woman about my age with reading glasses on a chain, leaned forward and said, "I cannot notarize a signature if the signer is disputing it." Renee snapped. "She is not disputing it. She is just old and upset." The notary looked at me, and I looked back at her with the same steady gaze I used to give panicking interns. She closed her stamp and set it down. I looked at Marta and she stood up. "Actually," Marta said, "the digital certificate was created on a device registered to a Renee Campo at 73.19.44.201. The author field in the PDF metadata says Renee Campo. The signature was applied at 11:42 p.m. on a Sunday night, and the notary stamp on the original partnership agreement can be traced back to a stamp that was reported lost 6 months ago." Marcus started to stand, but the 2 men in dark suits stepped forward. "FBI," one of them said. "Please remain seated." Renee did not stop talking. She said I was senile, but I had given her permission, that the sale was already funded. One of the agents read Renee her Miranda rights, and she kept repeating the word no like a toddler refusing a coat. But the Meridian representative was already shaking his head. He said, "We are voiding the sale. Our due diligence found the dual approval flag on the account, and we do not buy patient accounts from a company with a pending fraud docket." The branch manager held up a fingerprint scanner. "We still need your thumbprint, Mrs. Reese, to confirm the wire reversal," he said. I pressed my thumb down and the device beeped. "Biometric verification complete," he said. "The $860,000 will be returned to Cascade Medical Billing and Coding." I looked at Renee one last time. Her hands were flat on the table and her mouth was open. "I will not sign my own theft," I said, "and I did not spend 33 years saving strangers just to hand my life to someone who stepped over me to grab a file." The FBI agents put her in handcuffs, and Marcus tried to run, but he tripped on the leather portfolio and hit his head on the edge of the table. They cuffed him on the floor while he bled from a small cut above his eye. The branch manager later said it was the most action that Lobby had seen since a customer fainted during the 2008 recession. The aftermath was not loud. It was quiet, like the moment after a bad call when the monitor finally flatlines and the room stops moving. Renee and Marcus were charged with wire fraud, identity theft, forgery, and 2 counts of elder abuse. Renee's bond was denied because the judge found a flight risk, and she spent 11 months in county jail before pleading guilty. Marcus cooperated for a reduced sentence, but he still got 3 years for his part in the loan fraud. The $200,000 personal guarantee was declared void after a forensic accountant matched the forged signature to Renee's own hand, and the lender was forced to eat the loss. The $860,000 sale to Meridian was reversed, and every patient account came back to Cascade Medical billing and coding exactly as it had been before. The local paper ran a small story about the case, and Renee's photo from the arrest was printed next to a headline that read, "Woman forged mother-in-law's signature in billing fraud." Her real estate license was suspended, and Marcus was fired from his job at a car dealership when his employer saw the court docket. Renee's parents stopped speaking to her, and her sister wrote me a letter that said, "I always knew she was capable of this, but I did not think she would do it to you." I keep that letter in the ledger box too. I changed the name of the company to Code of Deceit Billing. The judge awarded me the business free of Renee's claim, and as part of her restitution, Renee was ordered to complete 800 hours of community service in my office. She shows up 3 days a week in a white lab coat with the company name embroidered on the left breast, and the words "coded me out" stitched across the back. She is not allowed to touch patient data or file claims. She is not allowed to answer the phone or open the mail. She shreds denials. That is her entire job. She sits in the back room with a cross-cut shredder, feeding page after page of denied claims into the teeth, and every single form we send out now includes a line for the fraud docket number. It is printed right at the top, above the patient name and the ICD-10 codes, so no insurance company can ever forget what happens when you sign someone else's name to a lie. I also reinstated the free claim audits for my old ambulance crew, the benefit Renee had promised and then buried in her drawer. My crew still calls me on their shift nights, and I can still hear the sirens in the background when they ask me to find a denied code. The court ordered full restitution of the $200,000 loan plus interest, but Renee filed for bankruptcy, and the judge assigned her wages from her community service stipend to me. It will take her 14 years to pay it off at $40 a week, and I have accepted every single payment in the spirit it was given, which is to say, without a word. David's ledger is in a safety deposit box now, next to the original notarized partnership agreement and the $4,900 check I never deposited. I keep the key on a chain around my neck. Some nights I open the box and read that line again. "Do not trust Renee, save yourself. He saw it coming, my boy, and he built a door I could lock from the inside. I only had to remember that I was still strong enough to turn the key." Every morning when Renee walks into the back room and puts on that lab coat, she has to see the words "coded me out," and every claim form we print carries the docket number of her own fraud. That is not revenge, that is accounting. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? If you believe family should not be allowed to sign away your life with a forged name, hit like and subscribe for more stories about people who fought back. I will see you in the next one.